Joining us now is Katie Jurstad, Deputy County Attorney who prosecutes individuals charged with exploitation. Katie, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Can you start by just telling us about how many of these cases do you prosecute a year?
Well, first I want to answer by saying it is an underreported crime, and so therefore it's under-prosecuted. And our office doesn't necessarily track cases by the age of victim, although if we did, a lot of different types of cases would fall into this category. For instance, there are just general property crimes committed against elderly people or older persons. There's assault cases often get filed, and there's no mention of the fact the victim happens to be older than 60 years old.
Okay.
So it's hard to track. That being said, I have a pretty mixed caseload of felony drug crimes, felony property crimes, child abuse and neglect cases that are handled, or we work in tandem with Child Protective Services on those, and cases involving the involuntary commitment of seriously mentally ill people. But within the criminal caseload that I have within the property crime category, there's probably between 5 to 10% of those involve property of older persons that has been stolen.
Okay. Wow, you are unfortunately very busy, it sounds like. Do you have to undergo special training to prosecute abused clients?
Well, law school is the first training. You have to be a member of the bar to work in a county attorney's office, in our case, Montana Bar Association. I think it's not necessarily required, but it's highly, highly recommended that prosecutors obtain as much training as possible in the specialty areas. So for instance, there are specialty trainings for elder abuse. There's one taking place right now in New Orleans, which I'm unfortunately missing, but there have been trainings provided to through the Montana County Attorneys Association. Several years ago, they put on a summer conference and brought a special prosecutor who specializes in elder exploitation and elder abuse cases out of San Diego County, California. And he put on a presentation, and so there was a little extra training on that then. And most recently, I attended a training put on by the National Clearinghouse on Abuse Later in Life. They're another agency that provides national trainings to prosecutors, adult protective services workers, and criminal investigators.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. So how many cases that you do end up with a guilty finding?
Fortunately, most of the cases I have worked on so far have resulted in guilty pleas by defendants. That isn't always the case. Sometimes they go to trial. One particular case my boss was working on when I first got hired, that did go to trial, and I worked on jury instructions at that time for him.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if someone is found guilty, what kind of sentence do they usually get?
Well, the penalty for exploitation of an older person is similar to felony theft, which is 10 years of prison time being the maximum time, and the lowest amount of time being 0 time in jail, 0 days in jail. There is a fine of up to $50,000, but the sentences that the courts impose will vary, and largely it just depends on so many factors. It depends on the criminal record of the defendant, the amount of restitution owed, the severity of the offense, if the offense was a violent offense. All of those things would have to come into play, because elder abuse and exploitation can be very varying. It can vary from one case to another quite a bit.
Okay. So how closely do you work with the detectives and adult protective services then?
I try to work really closely with them. For one, they're obtaining the evidence, and so if there's certain pieces of evidence missing, I like to be able to tell them right away so they can get on it and perform whatever follow-up investigation needs to be done. I was a participant on the adult protection team for a while. That's a monthly meeting of adult protection services caseworkers, along with providers from other social services agencies around the community, the services, for instance, provided by Center for Mental Health. They send a representative to the meeting, and we'll talk about hard cases at that meeting sometimes, even the ones that may not end up or result in criminal charges, but just to share thoughts and information. And I've really tried to keep the ties alive with all those agencies because they can always be of assistance in a prosecution case.
Good. Does the type or profile of a person who physically or mentally abuses somebody differ from someone who does financial exploitation?
You know, I haven't necessarily had enough experience to answer that question, I don't think, but I know Paul Greenwood, the prosecutor who is from San Diego County, who goes around the country presenting on this topic. He has, certain profiles of offenders that he refers to. In my experience, I'd say there's, 4 different types of offenders that I've seen. There's the caregiver or caretaker who exceeds or takes advantage of their access to somebody's wallet. There's the controlling spouse. There's a family member who has a gambling problem or maybe a drug problem, and so they use grandma or grandpa to, assist in that addiction. And there are those cases of con artists who close in on someone who's maybe isolated or lonely and takes advantage of that. And those profiles may overlap in a certain case. One defendant may actually fit into a couple of those categories. But once somebody is accustomed to having access to somebody's funds, if that access is threatened somehow, I think they have the potential to become a violent or abusive person.
Okay. We're actually about out of time, but really quickly, can you just talk about if a person is found guilty, what happens to the victim?
It's a really good question. I think a lot of victims are nervous of that. What will happen to me if the only person that I have supporting me, who's also my abuser, goes to jail? I think if the case were mine, I would try to connect that victim with an advocate who could assist in things like ensuring safe housing or making sure that the victim files paperwork so that they can stay in their house and the perpetrator cannot come near it. Those types of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I really appreciate your time and expertise today. Thanks for being with us. Thanks to all my guests today, and until next week, stay fit, stay well, and stay healthy with Healthy Living for Life.
Healthy Living for Life is brought to you by Mountain Pacific Quality Health. We'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions for future programs, visit our website at mpqhf.org or call us at 406-443-4020. You can also catch us on YouTube by visiting our website and clicking on the YouTube icon. Special thanks to Fire Tower Coffee House and Roasters. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions.